Thank you, Ciarán. And good afternoon, Jonathan, and I'm pleased to meet you, albeit virtual. But you state that the Good Friday Agreement and subsequent agreements were remarkably successful, and I think we can all agree with that. They brought peace to this island, they ended a 30-year conflict, and as you say, they allow political parties to concentrate on the day-to-day issues which affect people living in the north. However, Brexit has undermined the Good Friday Agreement and everything that was achieved by it and by subsequent agreements. And we have to acknowledge as well there are still elements of those agreements that have not been implemented, thus the necessity for this committee. But I suppose what I'm seeing in recent months, and particularly in recent weeks, is the undermining of everything that the Good Friday Agreement stands for. And it's been undermined by a small minority of people who live on this island, that's the DUP, and by the actions of the British government. The British government are about to breach an international agreement as they pursue their legislation in Westminster on the protocol. And look, we think they're going totally the wrong way around trying to resolve the issues. But we have a situation where we have no institutions in the north. The Assembly's not meeting, no sign of that to happen anytime soon. The North-South Ministerial Council hasn't met in possibly a year. And as I said, everything that the Good Friday Agreement and subsequent agreements achieved is being totally undermined. So besides replacing the British Prime Minister, which is outside our control, as someone who's negotiated the Good Friday Agreement and indeed have lots of experience in negotiating agreements between different nations, have you any advice, or if you don't think advice is prudent, some insights that you could share with this committee whose, as I said, remit is to see the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement to address the current undermining of the agreement and then to pursue the elements that have not been implemented? Or indeed, have you anything that maybe the Irish government, the Taoiseach and the Irish government should be doing around this issue? Because I think they've been kind of sort of meek on the issue and kind of saying it's an issue between the British government and the European Union. And while I know it's an agreement between them, at the same time, I think the Irish government could be more vocal on this, which is it's affecting so many of our citizens. And I suppose just a final question, again, as someone who was involved in negotiations and drawing up the Good Friday Agreement, you've detailed knowledge of the British government's intent regarding the criteria for what is needed for a border poll. So what is that criteria? Do you know what that criteria consists of? Is it based on a census? Is it based on election results, on polls? Because I think it's something we need to be at least discussing and hopefully preparing for, because I think it's something that's going to happen in the next few years, but we need to be prepared and not go into it like they did in Britain into the Brexit referendum. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I would distinguish between the DUP and the British government in all of this. The DUP is not the first or the only party to bring down the institutions since the Good Friday Agreement. They've been brought down a number of times by different parties for different reasons. I think it's tragic that they have brought them down. I think it's incredibly important to get them up again as fast as possible. And I think most people who worked on the issue of Northern Ireland in Britain agree that is something that must be done. I've noticed that the British government has different demands from the DUP. As I understand the DUP position, what they want is the Sainsbury test to be met. In other words, that's fairly practical issues to be addressed, and they're not so bothered about the ECJ and other ideological issues that the British government have raised, which have very little to do with people in Northern Ireland. And that's, I think, the danger and difficulty here is that this has all got played into Conservative Party politics, not the best interests of Northern Ireland. And I think it's actually important, personally, that the DUP and all the parties in Northern Ireland are in dialogue with the EU about this, because I think the EU should really be taking into account the interests of all of the parties in Northern Ireland about how the protocol works, its advantages, which many businesses fear are going to be threatened by what's happening, as well as the DUP's concerns largely to do with identity, but also to do with, as I say, the Sainsbury's test. So I would distinguish between DUP and British government on this. In terms of, I know it sounds rather hopeless to say wait for a new Prime Minister, but since I'm hoping and believing that's going to happen quite soon, what I would be doing if I was in the Irish government and the Commission, I would be preparing for negotiations post-Boris Johnson. If he stays, we're going to have a real problem, because I just don't see, if you're the EU negotiator, how can you trust the government that's done these things against the law? It's just really difficult to see how you can. And for the Irish government too, I think it is extremely complicated. So I'm afraid I don't have a magic answer of what we can do as long as Boris Johnson stays in power, apart from pray. And that's not necessarily a political solution. In terms of the border poll and what the requirements were, it's a long time ago and I can't claim to have a memory of this, but I don't think the actual terms were ever discussed in much detail. And I don't believe there's some secret drawer in the British government where it's written down what the Secretary of State will have to see before he calls a border poll. I don't think that exists. I don't know. I can't be sure. I've been out of government for since 2007. So certainly in 2007, there wasn't some drawer you'd open in case of census showing a majority or a plurality of nationalists rather than unionists. I do think you're right, though, in saying that preparing is important. What worries me most of all, in a way, combined with the mayhem caused by Brexit, is the sort of oath of omerta that everyone seems to have taken on the issue of what unification would mean. Because the trouble with Brexit was we had this focus on Brexit, which sold Brexit as being something very soft. It'd be sort of like Norway. It turned out to be something completely different. And if you want 1 million odd people in Northern Ireland not to be scared of what United Ireland might be, there needs to be a discussion of how minority rights can be protected, what might be a role for Stormont. And that I understand totally why the Irish government and particularly the British government doesn't want to talk about it. But I think in the end that's a mistake. When you don't talk about things, they make them more scary, more frightening. That doesn't mean to say I think it's imminent that you're going to get a majority or a border poll. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying refusing to talk about the issue is almost certainly a mistake.